Learn Accounting Podcast by Professor Accounting, Episode 18, Accounting Adjustments, Accruals and Prepayments of Expenses and Income. So I received many emails about this as well, mainly for revision for A2, even though it is an AS topic, and I think just people having some kind of mental blocks about how you construct ledgers and how you work out the P&L charge for the year. So I want to go through ledgers, and I'll go through an income example as well as an expense. So first of all, let's just remind ourselves of the accruals concept, the matching concept. This is the concept that profit is the difference between revenue and expenses incurred in generating that revenue. So we're matching income and expenditure to a particular period. If we look at the example I've got here, I'm going to do a full example with rent and rates because in this case it makes it a very full ledger with two variables, two expenses working together in the same account. And then I'll look at an income example, rent receivable, just on its own. A little bit easier in the sense of detail, but certainly the income does confuse quite a lot of students. So rent and rates, start off with some language first of all. We need to go through terms. Expenses, in terms of the language, we use prepaid for expenses, and we use accruals, accrued or owing, for expenses. The income, we don't use prepaid. You can say prepaid income, but we typically use in advance. And then in arrears is money owing in terms of income. So please use that language first of all. Just briefly run through my way of understanding the terms. Prepaid means paying in this accounting period for expenses relating to the next. Accruals, still needing to pay in this accounting period for expenses relating to the last year. In advance for income, receiving in this accounting period income relating to the next. And in arrears, expecting to be paid in this accounting period for income relating to the last. So please look at those and dissect that in understanding the terms. Let's start off with rent receipt rates. So I want to, again in the question, you'll be typically given some value of how much money has been paid or received. So typically a cash book might be given, or it could be just in a list. And then you're given here information relating to the start and end of the period. So I've got four variables because I'm saying rent is accrued at the beginning and end, and rate is prepaid at the beginning and end as well. Let's start off with a ledger. But 09 is the year I want to find the charge for the year for, and I just got the beginning of year 10 just because it's useful to understand, which you'll see. Let's fill the ledger with the logic in terms of how the ledger operates in terms of the words. So any rent rate is an expense. So expenses are on the debit side. So any expenses that are prepaid at the start of the year will be the first entry on the debit side. So anything that is accrued at the start of the year, owing, is on the credit side. Then if you leave a line and go down, let's move that to the next year. You'll see why I'm doing this. Prepaid BD obviously would be the same. There's nothing different there for the next year. Again, I'm only doing this to show you how you would approach this, so hopefully you can see what I'm doing here. Then you can work backwards. So accrued BD for 2010, you would need to have here an accrued CD at the end of 09. And a prepaid BD, you would need a prepaid CD at the end of year 9 as well. Now the last two variables is bank and P&L, or cash book and P&L. They were always on opposite sides, they have to be. So let's think of the cash book, that's the easiest one. When you pay your rent and rates, the cash book will go down. So that's the credit to the cash book, so it's a debit to the rent and rates. So therefore the P&L is on the credit side. And that makes sense as well, because rent and rates will be an expense. So an expense, you're crediting the rent and rates, so you're debiting the P&L, which means an expense. Now let's fill it in with the values that we're given. So the P&L is the unknown value, which is here. Just put an X, which will find that value. So fill in what you've got. Prepaid BD. So start, it means BD start of the year, CD means the end of the year. Prepaid at the start, well, that would be the 180 for rates. So you've got 180 going in here. Again, use the information carefully. Accrued at the start, so that will be for the rent, the 450. The accrued at the end of the year will be the 780, which relates to rent. The prepaid at the end of the year, prepaid at the end of the year will be the 240, which is for rates. And what you're doing at that point in time there is we're adding up the values so far. They actually have to be the same value: 7, 8, 9, 60, 4, 5, 6. No, it doesn't. That's not right. So that shouldn't be there. So it doesn't have the same value, and it shouldn't be. It's a bit very odd. It can, but it's very odd. So we've put the values in as they should be. Just going to get rid of the totals just for now. So the next step is to then put in the cash book. So you told the cash book value for rent and rates, which is over here. So remember, it's a payment, so it's a credit side. So the cash book value will get the 1755. And we're now ready now to work out the last variable, the P&L charge. So add up the opposite side to the P&L. You know it's going to be bigger because the P&L value is missing. So you add up that value, which will go over here. And then it's 2715. And move the total over. to the side you need, and then you can find the P&L by taking away the two variables. So the charge for the year equals 2715 minus 240 minus 450, and you get 2025 is your answer. So that would be 2025, and the full ledger is constructed as it should be in exam. You can get away with missing these off in an exam. They do want the CD value. But it's so nice it doesn't take a lot of extra time to do this, and it helps you with the construction of the ledger, given how I did it there with understanding this. So if you're a bit rusty on this topic, I would prefer you to do it, and hopefully it's a benefit to you. So how can you work this out with a maths calculation? How can you get 2025 with just pure maths rather than a ledger? So certainly harder. It is harder. I say harder because you've got to understand the ledger and operation, be confident with using the numbers and minus and adding. So here's how would you get the 225 with just 2025 as the value? Charge for the year with just the maths approach. Well, you start with this is the payment of 1755, and you have to then add or take away each of these four variables, and you've got to get them the right way around to get the answer. So what do you do with the 450 and so on and so forth? Right, let's start with a 180. So because it's at the top. So prepaid at the start of the year. Again, look at my definitions. I'll briefly go through these, what they mean, why add or take away. Prepaid BD means that for this accounting period, a prepayment at the start of this year means last year you paid money which relates to this period. So that means the 180 belongs to this account period. So you need to sum the 180 to the amount you've paid. Okay, so we're adding together how much total has been paid, but for this accounting period. What about the 450? Well, accrued at the beginning of this year. If it was an accrual for the beginning of this year, means we didn't pay enough. So the 450 was owing for last year. It does not relate to this year. So if 450 is accrued at the start of this year, it means that when we pay the 1755, £450 of that amount will be applicable to last year. So that must be subtracted. The 780 is an accrued at the end of the year. So that means that by this year, 2009, when we've paid 1755, we haven't paid enough of the and this is for what's the 780? That's for rent at the end of the year. We haven't paid enough for rent, so therefore the 780 wasn't paid, but it is due for this year. It is a part of this year, so we add on the 780. With regards to the last value, the 240, prepaid at the end of the year, well, that's again it's this accounting period, and we've paid this year for next year. So that the expense relates to next year, but we've paid this year. So the 240 does not belong to this accounting period. So we take that away. And there you get the 2025. Okay, so again, and you could write down how we did that in terms of names as well, add and minus each figure. In all fairness, use ledger. It is so much easier if you use a ledger and learn the ledger approach. Okay, let's look at the rent receivable for an income. Just bear this number in mind. 2850 is rent receivable. That's how much we've received, and we're going to go over to use that number to do this one. A little bit easier in the sense of detail, but income does confuse students with the wording. So any account I've chose rent receivable. Let's put in the terms as they should be. So think of, I always think because it's an income, think of debtors, because debtors owe you money, they owe you an income. So debtors that owe you income are what we call at the beginning of a year, which we tend to have. Would they be in some way in advance? Have they prepaid, which is in advance, or do they still owe you money, outstanding money in terms of in arrears? Well, the answer there is in arrears. So in arrears, and at the start of the year, in arrears BD. So that means still owing. They still owe you as a business. So arrears BD. The next on the credit side will be in advance. Again, I'm filling this in full, but as you can see, you don't need them all because you've got two missing variables. But I'll fill this in, give you a kind of template, and the template will always work. Then I would go down to the next year just to fill these in, just to set the scene, and you can then see the kind of trend. In advance BD, so at the end of 09, you're going to have in advance CD. In arrears BD, you're going to have in arrears CD, which is here. And then you can construct the cash book, or in this case I called it bank. Let's change that. Cash book and P&L. So remember they're opposite sides. You've got two variables left. Again, think of this. This is rent receivable. So that the income when it's paid, the cash book will increase. So we debit the cash book. So we credit the rent receivable. Make sure you understand that because it's on the opposite side to the expense ledgers. The P&L is on the debit side, and that makes sense because we are debiting this account for the rent receivable, and we are crediting over this side. So in terms of P&L, we're debiting the rent receivable, crediting P&L. Credit to P&L is other income, other revenue. So we've got all that going on there. Let's just fill this in terms of what we've got, and I'll take away what we don't need. So we've got rent receivable in arrears at the start. In arrears at the start. Start means B. So you can put that in as the 1250. Rent receivable in advance at the end of the year. In advance at the end. End means CD, so it's going to go here. 575. We can see a little pattern here. It's all on the debit side. Apart from obviously the other entry we make is the cash book. So what was the value for the cash book, which is here, 2850. So 2850 is going to go over this side. You have to have something on the other side in the example, but it's clear you don't have anything else. So the bigger value is the side without the P&L on, because you find the P&L. So that's going to be the sum of these, which obviously is 2850. Move the 2850 over, which you get the value there, and then charge for the year equals 2850 minus 1250 minus 575, and we get 1025. So 1025 is the charge for the year for 2009. We can enter that into the accounts. So 1025 will go in here, and then they're balanced. Just obviously for neatness and tidiness, advanced CD, advanced BD, make that 575 as well. Now I'll tidy it up in terms of what you need. So you don't necessarily need this, just so we can show you. You don't need that. You don't need this. Obviously that formula, so that's going to be in advanced BD, which is over here. So as it is there, that is how it would look in your answer. 9 and 10 in advanced BD. Some examples, they're not too bothered about having the BD here. It is worthwhile having. It doesn't take long to write it, but mainly the marks, especially OC, the marks tend to come from the CD value. But it's always useful to show the BD to help you get the CD. I hope you find that useful. Let's just quickly look at the maths approach to doing this. A bit easier in this case. You can see the ledger is helping you do it. But the charge for the year, we always start with the payment or receipt. In this case, this is a receipt because it's income. So this is the 2850. And we then have to look at the two variables which is given in the table. So let's kind of understand these. Rent receivable in arrears. So at the start of the year, 1250 is in arrears at the start of the year. So that means that when we receive the 2850 during this year, 1250 is still owing for last year because it's the start of the period. So we must deduct the 1250. Which is there. We must deduct the 1250 because it relates to the previous accounting period. Okay, the 575, this is rent receivable in advance. So in this accounting period, we were paid 2850. Well, that payment of 2850 includes 575 for next year. So again, that does not belong in this accounting period. So therefore you take them away and you see we did that in the ledger 1025. So you can find some common trends. I mean, you can see the one thing is glaring students in the face when you see this. Whenever you get a situation like this, if you have 1250 and 575, then the sign of a math calculation is always the same. So it's minus and a minus. If you had some values, this value is over here, it's going to change completely. If this is going to go over there, going to go over here. If you've got the inverse, which is in arrears at the end and then in advance at the start, it's going to be the same sign, so they will both be added. So there's a commonality there. So again, you might have this over here instead and nothing at the end. So again, deal with that in the ledger as I've shown you. And there's not an infinite number of ways it could be. There's several ways, and you should know all of them. So go back to the layout that I did at the beginning of this example and the first example, and learn the layout. You must learn the layout. And you don't have to use if you've never seen this before in terms of in arrears BD or in advanced CD, you don't have to use that. You can just use BAL BD, BAL CD, but it is incredibly useful and powerful if you do use the language when you're learning it, so then you become so fluent at doing it that you know BD on the debit side for income means in arrears, and so on and so forth. Well, hopefully you find this useful. Quite a bit I've gone through there. Hopefully it's of benefit to you. I want to thank you for stopping by. Here's my details. Again, please do rate the podcast and give me comments, give me feedback as to how you found it. Maybe you found this really useful, maybe you found it useful at all. Maybe it's basic, it's too simple, maybe you want me to go harder. I don't know how I can go harder on this topic, but certainly please give me your honest feedback about the podcasts. It's much appreciated. Well, I want to thank you for stopping by. I'll see you next time for a podcast from Professor Accounting.